Candidates will now ask a question to each of their opponents. Candidates will have 30 seconds to ask the question, 60 seconds to respond, and the candidate who asks the questions will have 30 seconds for rebuttal. By random selection, Brian Kemp, you may ask the first question to Stacey Abrams.
Well, thank you very much. As many people know, I have over 100 sheriffs endorsing my campaign, several of which are Democrats. And my question for Ms. Abrams tonight is how many sheriffs statewide have publicly endorsed your campaign?
Mr. Kemp, what you are attempting to do is continue the lie that you've told so many times. I think you believe it's the truth. I support law enforcement and did so for 11 years, worked closely with the Sheriff's Association. I'm probably the only person standing here who's ever actually written a SOP for a police department when I was working for the city of Atlanta. But I have two brothers, one who has committed crimes, and I want his victims to be able to call the police and get the help they need, and I've always supported that right. But I have another brother who has faced being pulled over for driving while black when he was coming back from his job as a social worker. Unlike you, I don't have the luxury of relying on slogans to describe my position on public safety. I believe that we need safety and justice because I love both of my brothers. And like most Georgians, I lead a complicated life where we need access to help, but we also need to know that we are safe from racial violence. While you may not have had that experience, too many people I know have. And that is why I will always stand up for making certain that safety and justice are the conversations we're having in Georgia and the delivery we have as the next governor of Georgia.
Thank you. 30 seconds, Mr. Kemp.
Well, I would just tell people that, look, I support safety and justice. But Ms. Abrams refused to answer the question, so I'll let you know that the answer is zero. No sheriffs are endorsing her statewide because of her stances on wanting to defund the police, eliminate cash bail, and serving on the boards of organizations like the Margaret Casey Foundation that supports and gives grants to organizations that are promoting the defund the police movement.
If I may respond, because he actually lied there.
Yes,
I do have the support of sheriffs, but unlike Mr. Kemp, I do not make it my plan to list every person who supports me. I have the support of sheriffs. I have the support of advocates. I have the support of victims. I have the support of those who want to be treated fairly in our system. I have to have conversations with the entirety of Georgia. I don't have the luxury of being a part of a good old boys club where we don't focus on the needs of our people. And that is why my mission has been to put out very concrete plans explaining how I will serve justice, how I will serve safety, and how I will serve the citizens of the state of Georgia.
30 seconds, Brian Kemp.
Well, look, I would just tell people, I know Ms. Abrams is upset and mad because these are things that she said. This is not me making this up. This is things that she said in interviews that she's done, and she's sitting on organizations that you can go look at the facts yourself. And that's why the men and women in law enforcement want a governor that is going to stand with them, who has been with them, not only to have their back, but also stand shoulder to shoulder on things like civil unrest and going after street gangs and human traffickers.
Thank you very much. Stacey Abrams, you get the next question for Shane Hazel.
Mr. Hazel, Republicans and Democrats have raised the alarm over the rise in the Chinese Communist Party-backed companies purchasing American farmland. To date, they've purchased more than 1 million acres of farmland in the state of Georgia. Would you agree with Mike Pompeo that allowing those purchases in the state of Georgia is a sign of madness? And would you be concerned about the national security implications of the Chinese Communist Party purchasing this land with the support of the state of Georgia?
I see the setup for this question. I understand why it was projected at me. As libertarians, we believe that you own your property and that the state can't take it away from you and can't sell it or can't determine who you sell it to. The CCP, obviously, which is going through its own internal unrest right now, I believe is probably purchasing this with things like central bank digital dollars and yuan, which are also coming down to a critical nature where people are in uprising in China. What we need to look at is how these purchases are being made. Are we accepting fiat, CCP yuan in Georgia as a actual currency? It's about as good as the U.S. currency, the fiat currency that we're about to have hoisted on us in terms of a CBDC. I'm not going to tell you or anybody else as governor how or who to sell your property to. And I imagine that in the end, the free market will work itself out.
Thank you. Stacey Abrams, 30 seconds.
The state of Georgia is watching our farmland be purchased by the Chinese Communist Party. And while that is not normally a conversation that we have, it is something that we should be concerned about. Agriculture is our #1 industry, and Georgia has 13 military installations. The fact that the state of Georgia is working with the Chinese Communist Party, using one of their technologies that both Donald Trump and Joe Biden have warned is very much a national security threat, should be of great concern to every Georgian. This is not about being concerned simply about who's owning the land, but it's about how much access to our information they have because of this state.
Thank you. Shane Hazel, you may ask your question of Stacey Abrams.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. The military-industrial complex is a big problem. It is. And the fact that we have people trying to come here to, I don't know, get a backdoor into our military, I think one of the things we should be talking about as Georgians and as executives is the Defend the Guard Act, where our military has been used very, I don't know, haphazardly around the world to go and take resources from the Middle East or now in
Mr.
Ukraine.
Hazel, your question.
This is my question to who?
To Stacey Abrams.
We've already switched gears.
Yes.
My question to you, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I have hearing problems, guys. My question to you is, I mentioned CBDCs. As the executive of Georgia, when we come into a CBDC from the Federal Reserve, will you, as the executive, accept this CCCP-style currency?
I believe that the conversation about currency is a complicated one. And part of the challenge we have is how this currency is transmitted, the very real security threats with digital currency, the hacking and mining of that digital currency should concern all Georgians. As the governor of Georgia, I will work very closely with the Federal Reserve, but also with the innovators and the entrepreneurs who do see an opportunity. But before we take a step forward that could put us at risk, our responsibility is to understand the complexity of what is happening with these transactions. And as exciting as it is, we also know it's deeply problematic when we do not have the adequate safeguards in place. That's one of the reasons I've raised concerns about WeChat and about the purchase of farmland. But what we know overall is that we need a governor who's conversant in these issues, who understands that, for example, in the state of Georgia, we have access to $3.5 billion in American currency that could be delivered tomorrow to save our hospitals and to save our lives. But our current governor has refused to accept those dollars. My intention is to do what's best for the state of Georgia every single day.
Thank you. Shane Hazel, you get a 30-second rebuttal.
Yeah, working with the Federal Reserve, who's got us into the mess that we are in right now because of a centralized fiat currency, it will be absolutely worthless. They will be dangling carrots in front of the governor, in front of the executives, in front of the legislature to do exactly what their mandates are. If they are mandating that they take the property of people, then they will do it. If they want to invade your homes, your privacy, your businesses, they will do it because of CBDCs.
All right. Stacey Abrams, please ask your question to Brian Kemp.
Absolutely. Mr. Kemp, under your leadership, there is currently a 100-year gap between minority-owned businesses and majority-owned businesses. Although minorities comprise 48% of the population, they only generate 12.2% of the business revenue in the state. And under every analysis that we have seen, it will take 100 years to close that gap, given the current process that you have in place. You served 4 years in the Senate, 8 years as Secretary of State in charge of businesses. You served 4 years as governor. What are your concrete, specific, targeted plans to decrease and address the racial equity gap currently facing contracting and purchasing for minority-owned businesses?
Governor Kemp?
Well, I would remind Georgians that the first part of my plan was keeping our state open for business and allowing all business people and working Georgians to work when Stacey Abrams was criticizing me for doing that. Also pushing to get our kids back in the classroom when, again, Stacey Abrams was criticizing me for doing that. A lot of Georgians, including African Americans and other minorities, cannot go to work if their kids are not in the classroom. We have the lowest unemployment rate in the country for African Americans. We also were named we're in the top 10 of the states for black entrepreneurship in the state of Georgia. So our economy is incredible, and we will continue to work with all of those entrepreneurs in the days ahead and working class Georgians, because we are the ones that have been fighting for you when Miss Abrams was not. We were giving tax refunds. We were doing tax cuts. We were suspending the gas tax to help you deal with 40-year high inflation when she was criticizing us.
Stacey Abrams, 30-second rebuttal.
I would point out that Mr. Kemp did not address the needs of purchasing and contracts for black and brown owned businesses, which is what he has refused to do for the last 16 years. We know that $10.9 billion has been delivered to the state of Georgia through 2 recent acts at the congressional level. And Brian Kemp does not have a plan for making certain that people of color have access to those contracts, access to purchasing. It was only in July of this year that he finally acknowledged that there might be a problem. He has said that we need to study it. I would tell him, just cheat off of my paper. I know the answer. We need a governor who actually believes in equity, racial equity, economic equity in the state of Georgia, and I will deliver.
Thank you. Shane Hazel, please ask your question to Brian Kemp.
Brian, in 2020, on April 2nd, you locked down Georgia, threatening peaceful people with force and coercion. You called people in Georgia non-essential, and it killed millions of jobs. You bent the knee to big pharma and pushed a vaccine that was untested on people, and it has killed people. They have lost their loved ones. You've allowed bureaucracy to invade our businesses. And then you had the audacity to brag about record tax revenue. You want to say sorry to anybody?
So is that a question, or?
That is a question. Do you want to say sorry to anybody?
Well, look, I'll be glad to talk about my record because obviously Mr. Hazel is gravely mistaken. If you look at the executive orders that I signed, we said every business in Georgia was essential. There was a few that we asked to help us stop the spread, flatten the curve, build PPE supplies and hospital bed capacities. Because unlike him, I was getting the calls from hospitals saying, hey, we are out of surgical gowns. We're out of masks. We need ventilators. And we were literally working 24/7 to supply those items while also keeping our economy open in this state. And as you know, I was the first state to open the small parts that we asked to close, and our recovery's been as good as any state in the country. We have had 2 record years of economic development because of our business environment, working with the General Assembly to make sure that we're putting Georgians first and Georgia businesses and Georgia workers first, and that's what I'm committed to continuing to do.
30 seconds, Mr. Hazel.
You should have put Georgia freedom first, period. You didn't have the power to lock down businesses, and you signed the executive order on April 2nd. It was clear as day. I sat there and watched you do it, and I was like, there is no coming back from this. The idea that the default was to lock down Georgia instead of trusting Georgians with their freedom to adapt in a time of very changing circumstances, I think is a tyrant move, and I think the left and right are fascist and communist socialists, whereas we're talking about real liberty, trusting Georgians with those decisions.
Thank you, Mr. Hazel. Brian Kemp, you have the final question in this round for Shane Hazel.
Well, I would just ask Mr. Hazel if he supports the things that we have done because we were open and Georgians were working and we've had excess revenue. So instead of doing big government...
That's our tax money.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I don't support it because here's the thing is when we get to that point, when we talk about what you're doing.
Ask my
finish your question.
Please go ahead.
I would just say, do you support the tax cuts we've done, returning $1 billion of taxpayer money and suspending the gas tax for Georgians to help fight through 40-year high inflation and bad domestic energy policy?
Georgia, I hope you hear me when I say libertarians think taxation is theft. It's your money. It's your property. Yeah. You should be able to determine what you do with it. I don't support the fact that you haven't ended qualified immunity. I don't support the fact that you haven't ended civil asset forfeiture. I don't support the fact that you haven't ended the drug war. You haven't ended nonviolent crime. You haven't ended cash bail. You haven't ended no-knock raids. You haven't implemented community review boards. And you haven't banned blacked out cop cars that go after people for more money. It's ridiculous. De-escalation by the executive to leave peaceful people alone in the state of Georgia. That's my message to both of you, to everybody in the state who wears a badge. Stop going after peaceful people.
Mr. Kemp, 30-second rebuttal.
Well, that's simply not true. As Georgians know, I have followed the laws and the Constitution of this state. And I ran on going after criminal street gangs because I knew there was an issue in our state when other people wouldn't even talk about it and the media wouldn't acknowledge it. And you look at the amount of fentanyl that's coming across the southern border because of bad border policies from this administration. Every governor in the country is having to deal with that. So, yes, I'm going to go after bad people that are selling bad drugs and killing our children and our other citizens.
The free market way to do that would be to allow cannabis and psilocybin to handle the mental health issues.
Mr.
Okay,
Hazel,
well, I wasn't
we're gonna
talking
move on.
about cannabis. I was talking about deadly fentanyl.
Gentlemen,
Stop busting them then.